I'm Lindsay McDougall, Director of the Rutgers Center for Nonprofit Leadership and Development. This video is a part of a series focused on using data in nonprofit research and practice. One of the things that we often see is that there's a lot of valuable data sources available, but it's not always clear how to actually access them or use them in meaningful ways. The goal of this series is to make those resources more approachable by walking through what the data are, where they come from, and how they can be used to better understand nonprofit organizations and the broader sector. In this video, Dr. Tiana Marrese provides an overview of IRS 990 data, including how to work with it and why it's such an important resource for nonprofit research and analysis.
My name is Dr. Tiana Marrese, and today I'll be talking about the nonprofit data, giving a brief introduction. And so this video is really for anyone who wants to start looking or getting their feet wet in understanding the nonprofit sector. They really present a high-level overview of what organizations are within the nonprofit sector and where to find one of the most robust and widely used data sets to analyze these organizations. Before I jump in, my name, as I had mentioned, is Dr. Marrese. I'm an assistant professor at the School of Public Affairs and Administration at Rutgers University. My research, at a really high level, asks how and why individuals engage in paid and unpaid labor across sectors, and I'm particularly interested in the results that this has on the market. Today, as I had mentioned, we'll be looking at a specific subset of my research, really just asking, how do we understand the nonprofit sector, specifically looking at data through the Internal Revenue Service. So just to give you an understanding of how this data comes to be and how these organizations exist, we're going to go through the life cycle of a nonprofit. Let's assume that you want to create an organization, and in the creation, you realize that your mission or your intention for this organization is really to further purposes of charity, religion, education, or science. If it falls under this or a couple other differentiations or deviations of this mission, you can apply for exemption status, and this exempt status would allow you to be exempt from income taxation within the United States. If you receive exempt status, you then have to remain within compliance, ensuring that your organization meets the expectations of tax exemption, and you have to often file annually through the IRS to report your overall organizational activities. So organizations that you might think about when it comes to the nonprofit sector, often, one of the largest that people think about are these charities or charitable organizations. We also have churches and religious organizations that would fall under tax exemption, in addition to private foundations, political organizations, and other nonprofits. This would include, when we think about these organizations, this would include organizations like the Salvation Army, as well as the Gates Foundation and the homeowners associations or the parent-teacher associations. In general, or often, these organizations are required to file annual returns to remain in compliance with the IRS. Before we dive deeper into the data or the filings that these organizations do, it's really important to keep in mind an exception that occurs within the nonprofit sector. There are some organizations, because of the activity that the activities that they perform or the nature of their businesses, that they do not need to register or file annually with the IRS. This would include certain organizations such as auxiliaries of a church, private foundations that fall under a specific IRS code, certain political organizations, and then very small grassroots organizations, often those that have annual gross receipts of under $550,000, or organizations, again, that are outlined or may fall under these features, more specifically that are verified by the IRS. So really, it's just important that you should be mindful of who is missing in the 990 data. And when you draw conclusions, who might be left out from those conclusions. So when we talk about the nonprofit sector, often people refer to 990 data. 990 data comes from this 990 form that tax-exempt organizations or many tax-exempt organizations are required to file to maintain their tax exemption status. The shortest and most prevalent of this tax exemption is this 990N, or these postcard files. These forms are typically filled out by organizations that have less than $50,000 within receipts, and they're really just keep track of extremely high level and basic information that allows the IRS to just maintain an understanding of, where these or how many of these organization types exist. You then have the 990 Easy and the 990, which are two of the most widely studied and used files or forms. These tend to be longer and have more data than the 990N, and these are typically filled out by medium to large size nonprofits. You also have the 990 that's specific to private foundations and other schedules that allow specific organization types or activity types to be disclosed and tracked by the IRS. So given these 990 forms, the IRS compiles three main data files. The first is this business master file. This is a cumulative file of all exempt organizations within the United States. This is a running list that allows people to keep track of all of the organizations that the IRS deems as tax exempt at the time in which they compile this information. Feeding into this BMF or this business master file are the series return files. These are the individual forms. So the 990, the 990 Easy, 990N, these are the individual forms that feed into this cumulative file and allow us to really get individual level or organizational level information on tax exempt organizations. And lastly, the IRS compiles this SOI or Statistics of Income sample file. This is a sample of organizations across the nonprofit sector that is cleaned for analysis and allows you to really have a clear understanding of the nonprofit sector as a whole through a representative sample of organizations that fall into this category. It's important to note some of the positives and negatives when using this data. And a lot of this you'll find when you start playing around with the data yourself, but it's really easy to kind of see that this data, it is one of the most prevalent and well-used sources to understand the nonprofit sector. And that's really because, there's strong financial record, there's records across multiple years, and they collect features like geographic and person level components. There's also, because it's reported to the government, there's strong deterrence against misreporting or malicious reporting. And so it really allows us to have one of, a foundational or a very strong resource to really understand tax exempt or nonprofit organizations within the United States. However, if you were to open up the data, it would be pretty clear pretty quickly some of the negatives that also come with the data set. One is that the information can be very noisy. Organizations across time can file very contradictory information about their finances. This may be, a result of not having the knowledge to understand how to file financial forms, or it may be that these organizations have a lot of nuance that are not fully explained within the forms. And so it's just important to notice that, or to note that some cleaning and some assumptions must be made whenever looking at this data. We'll see that a little bit when we look at the data ourselves. But another example would be the NTEE codes. These are codes that are supposed to act as categories for the type of nonprofits that registered organizations are. So this would help to differentiate between public safety organizations and human service organizations, but these codes tend to change over time, and there's a lot of pushback on whether they accurately represent the output or the mission of these organizations. It can be hard to connect filings across years. We have amendments, so often organizations will file multiple files per year. They might also file it as a group, so you'll have one large headquarters, and then smaller organizations that might also file underneath the group, and so it creates some complication to understand what individual nonprofits are doing relative to what their parent nonprofits are doing. Despite it also having a lot of good data, it's important to note that it's a lot of specific data. So it's mainly used by the IRS to understand the financial health of the nonprofit sector. Given this, it's not going to be able to give you all of the information that you might need or might be interested in relative to nonprofits. As I previously mentioned, always keep in mind that a significant part of the ecosystem is overlooked. You're not going to find organizations that do not file within this data set. And you're also going to not find organizations that maybe function very similar to nonprofits, but aren't registered as tax-exempt organizations. This would include organizations like B corporations or social enterprises that operate in the for-profit sector. And lastly, just to keep in mind, recently we've had this switching of environments. We've pushed, or the IRS has moved to electronic filing, which really changes some of the patterns that we've been seeing in terms of overall filing for nonprofits. So with this, we can really start thinking about accessing the data and asking ourselves, what's available out there. So we'll spend about the next 10 to 20 minutes talking about, what's out there and how do we answer questions relative to some of the raw and most basic data we have on nonprofits. I've pulled a couple of important sites. These are different sites from the main landing page of the IRS. They have this main page that looks at just nonprofit or tax-exempt organizations. And within this main page, you'll find links that allow you to search specific tax-exempt organizations. We'll see this a little bit later. You can also do bulk data downloads as well as the business master files. We're going to spend some time here really looking at some of the most fundamental data provided by the IRS. What can we really find or understand about the nonprofit sector? You'll also find the SOI available on their website, in addition to educational resources. The data is very nuanced and requires a lot of understanding about financial reporting and nonprofit entities, and so it's really good to be able to start with educational resources as well as understanding the underlying processes and assumptions that go into creating the data. So just to give an example of, what you might be interested in and how easy it is to really get started on some of these analyses, we can consider looking at the business master files, which are, the running list of all organizations that are registered as tax exempt in the IRS. And we can ask some of these questions. We can ask, how many charities, specifically, this is a subset of overall nonprofits that focus on scientific and religious and other types of missions. We can ask how many, 501c3s exist within New Jersey. We can then subset it to Newark. We can then also ask, how many of these charities are small, where we define small by the asset sizes that they have. We can look at the distribution of forms that they're filing, as well as the number of organizations that are applying for tax exemption or are receiving tax exemption over time. And lastly, we'll just finalize by getting more information on individual organizations. So let's go to the business master files just to show you what this information looks like. And I've already have some of this pulled up, but we'll start from scratch. You'll see that this really just kind of gives you information about organizations. It's a cumulative file, and it's the most recent information. They also have this information sheet here that gives you similar to a code book that gives you information about the underlying data, as well as the available fields and the definition of these fields. So we can go down here. We're specifically interested in the state of New Jersey. We can download New Jersey. We also see that they have other CSV files. They have it by region, and you can also pull multiple CSVs and attach them together. Alternatively, they also provide this SOI if you wanted to do a representative analysis at a high level of the nonprofits across the United States, rather than looking at a specific state itself. We'll look at New Jersey, so all I would do is click this to download this data. I'm going to see this data right here. We're going to open it again so that it starts fresh. All right, we're not going to convert. With this data, we can now start playing around with it and answer some of the questions that we might have. So the first question that we had posed was really understanding how many 501c3 or charity organizations are in New Jersey. I'm going to revisit my data dictionary or my code book to understand where I might see this, this coding of 501c3s. So 501cs are all of the tax-exempt organizations. What I'm specifically interested in is this subsection. And I'll scroll down so you can see the definition of subsection. These are codes that are shown under 501cs. Remember, 501cs are these tax-exempt organizations. And we're specifically interested in charities, also known as 501c3s. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit further to find that, to find the subsection codes. What I can see here, the subsection, again, I'm interested in these threes. The 501c3s are going to include charitable organizations, educational organizations, literary, etc. And so we'll really encompass what we often view as nonprofits. These nonprofits are charitable organizations that look at specific or accomplish specific goals through their mission. All right, with this, we're going to start looking at the data. The intention of this is to show you how easily the data can be gathered and analyzed. You're welcome to pause the video and kind of do this step by step along with me. I won't go too in depth of the Excel that I'm using. Rather, it's to focus the intention on the data itself. But again, you can run this yourself to kind of see how easy it is to traverse this data set. All right, so I've created a pivot table that allows me to summarize large amounts of data very quickly. I'm specifically interested in looking at all of the nonprofits that fall under 501c3s. The first thing that I'm going to do is going to create a row that lists all of the states. I see that the only state that's listed is New Jersey. This is great. This verifies that I am, in fact, only looking at New Jersey tax-exempt organizations. I am then going to pull in subsection into my columns. That subsection is the one that's listing the 501c types. We're specifically interested in 501c3s. So I will subset my columns to only the 501c3s. And then lastly, I will bring in my EINs. I'm going to put them as my values and count them. So these are my unique identifiers. And I'm going to see that the count of unique identifiers of tax-exempt organizations within New Jersey is 44,179. So we have a pretty quick and easy way to see all of the charities that are registered through the IRS within New Jersey. And then the next question that we have is going to be, what about the number of organizations that exist not in New Jersey, but rather in the city of Newark? So I'm going to pull down the city onto my rows. I can get rid of states since all of them will be in New Jersey. And I'm going to specifically search Newark. Here we have a pretty good example of the ways in which the data may be messy. We can kind of see that there's three possible cities that have the starting of Newark. We have Newward, Newark, and Newark with 2 Ks. We can assume that these are just typos within the data. in that this is really, again, showcasing how messy some of the data can be. We have limited it to what we believe to be inputs of Newark, and we see that out of the 44,000 charities in New Jersey, about 1,500 exist in Newark. Great, so we've answered that question. We can return and ask, how many New Jersey charities are small, where we define small as assets below 99,999. So we can return to our data dictionary, and we can look for the variable of asset code. And asset code here is defined as the book value amount of assets shown on the most recent Form 990 series. With this asset code, we have these different levels. We're particularly interested in levels beneath $100,000, $100,000. So this is 3 and under. So I'm going to return back to my table. I'm going to remove my subsection. For now, I'm going to remove my city. I'm just kind of resetting everything. I am interested in, again, that subsection of 501c3s. I want to know charities. And I'm also interested in the asset code, looking at asset code between 0, 1, 2, and 3. So I will only select asset codes that are under $100,000. And here we have the final results. We see that out of the 44,000 tax exempt or 44,000 charities that exist in New Jersey, 34,000 or a good, significant chunk of them have assets under $100,000. Great, so we've been able to really answer, on average, what does the charity situation look like in New Jersey? We could look at other types of organizations. We could do political organizations or religious organizations. It would really just require that we play around and understand which subsection denomination is required for each of the specific organizations that we're interested in. We've also seen how to look at them relative to size when we consider features like financial reporting of assets. We can then ask about the distribution of the primary returns. So this is the distribution of forms that are required for the organization. So this is asking, how many organizations file 990, how many file 990 easy, 990N. So we can come back to our data and refer to our code and see that conveniently this filing requirement code is below this asset code variable. And we see that we have these different codes for the different forms. And so we're going to put this right next to our Excel sheet, and we are going to start fresh. We're no longer interested in only charities. We're going to look at all organizations, and we don't need the specific assets either. What we're going to do is look at the filing requirement code, which is found right here, filing requirement code, and we're going to ask that it goes to the rows. I can copy this data. I usually like to work with some of the hard-coded data rather than the pivot tables because it can be a little finicky. And then I can just rename, this will be form type, and I can rename this and this will be form count. I can rename these. So the 13 is not required religious. This one, 14, is not required. We'll call it other. And what we're going to do is actually add this, the not religious other, which they're saying instrumentalities of state and political. We'll add that to the not required other here as well. So all I'm going to do is just, I'm going to take back this, and I'm going to say this is also not required other. And for this one, I will just add in that 25 from above. Okay, and we'll remove this row. This is 0, 1, just to remind you, is We're going to pull up the data dictionary again. The 01 is 990 or 990 easy. The 02 is 990N. 03 is group return. 06 is not required church. This is a pretty large one as well, so we'll do church. And this not required religious is other religious. And then lastly, that 07 is also is government. It looks pretty small, so we're going to just delete this one. We'll just assume that we don't need to consider, you know, such a small percentage of forms that are being filled out by the government. Of course, this is purely for our need to create a nice pie chart, but it would always depend on the research question that you have. All right, and here we have the final results. And we can look at this a little more easily. What we can do is kind of look at this, and we can add, let's see how easy it is to figure out. If we make it larger and maybe move this stuff around, we can kind of see the breakdown of the different types of filings that are present within our data set. So we have, according to what we're seeing right now, we have that about 50% of the organizations within New Jersey file 990N. These are the 990 postcards. We have about 25% file the 990 or 990 easy. Then we have others that are not required. We have the church that's not required, as well as other organizations that are not required. And we see that these also make up a significant proportion. It's interesting because they're not required to file, and yet they're still filing. So there might be some unique underlying incentive that they're filing, or they might have, you know, some attributes that encourage them to file. But we can really see a very nice distribution of the filing that gives us a good understanding of the environment of information being collected on the tax-exempt organizations. Okay, we can go back. We can now ask, how has the number of organizations with tax-exempt status changed over time? So to return back to our table, I'm going to insert a new pivot table just for the sake of a clean start. And when I go back to my data dictionary, what I'm interested this time is the year of founding, or the year in which they applied for to be tax exempt. And this is going to be the ruling year right here, the ruling date. So this is the month and year on a ruling or letter, determination letter recognizing the exemption status. So I want to see for each year how many organizations have their ruling year. Before I do this, I'm going to delete and return to my raw data. What I forgot was that this ruling column includes the year and the month. For simplicity, I'm just going to look at the ruling year. So I'm going to just grab the first four characters of each cell of the ruling column to really get an understanding of the years. Given this, I'm going to pull all of this data, and I'm going to, again, create a pivot table. With this pivot table, I can do very similar to what I had done previously. I can have my ruling years on the rows, and then I can have a count of the EINs for the values. Similar to what I did before, I'm going to copy this data. Again, we can see data messiness here, where we have some organizations that seem to be claiming that their organization was founded in the year 0. We will just right now ignore this, but depending on your research question, you might have to dig a little deeper into what type of organizations are reporting this. I'm going to copy this data and just put it, hard-coded to the right. And then I can title this, so I know that the first column is my year, and the second column is my count of tax-exempt orgs. And then I can pretty quickly insert a line chart. And this line chart really allows me to see the change in registered organizations under tax exempt status across years, where we see this huge uptick starting in 1970, but really becoming quite prevalent or prominent in 2010 onward. Great. So we've really been able to, in a short amount of time, with very very basic data, answer some of these really interesting questions about the nonprofit sector. The last thing I want to do before we end this tutorial is just talk about, how do you get individual level data as well? Let's say that you're really interested in specific organizations and you want to know some of the information that the IRS has collected on these specific organizations. To do this, we're going to go beyond the BMF. We're going to specifically look at this tax-exempt organization search. So this tax-exempt organization search looks like this. Again, you can find it going from the main IRS webpage, looking at charities and nonprofits, and then doing the charity searches, right? What we see here is I could possibly type in organization name, but I know that the name tends to be quite messy when organizations register with the IRS. So I'm going to stick with their unique identifier, the EIN. What I'm going to then do is go back to the BMF and just look at the EINs for the organizations that I might be interested in. So the first organization that I see is the Church of Our Lord Jesus Christ of Macedonia. I have this EIN here. I'm going to copy this EIN and I am going to type in or copy their EIN right here. And I get to really see, what data or what information is available on this specific organization. I find it right here and I can open it up. And what I see is that on record, there's this publication 78 data. This is the publication 78 is the file that they have to fill out to become eligible for tax exemption. It makes sense that there's not many other files on record for this organization because they are a church, so they're not required to file every year to stay in compliance with their exemption status. We can go back and ask about another charity that we might be interested in. This time, let's look at the Hanover Soccer Club. This is not a church, and we would expect that they would have some reporting throughout the years. And so we can kind of see, if they have what information we can really look at for them. Again, I'm going to enter their EIN and search. I see that they come up right here, which is great. And then I can kind of scroll down. We have the same publication 78 data. But then I also see some of this other information. I see the determination letter that allows for a tax exemption status to be confirmed. And then I have their tax forms. It seems like this organization is mainly filing the tax form 990 EASY, although they have some EO or EASY and ERs that I could look into. I believe these are different schedules for their specific type of activity. And I could go in and really download this form. And so I can do some pretty nice research on the raw data or on the raw submission of each organization to kind of understand a little bit more about the nonprofit sector through the lens of individual organizations. So with that, we've really spent a lot of time going through the starting blocks that comprise a lot of research on the nonprofit sector. We've looked at how to download some of the raw data and answer a lot of interesting questions just using this raw data. And we've also dug a little bit deeper into understanding individual organizations. Before I leave you, I do want to note, if you look at some of the 990 data, you'll notice it can be quite messy and quite cumbersome to use. The good news is that in addition to the IRS, which gives you this raw data and is really the source of a lot of information we have on the nonprofit sector, there's a lot of other organizations that have spent time making this data accessible and relevant for other research questions as well. So I encourage you to look at some of these other sources and see what they've done and how they've kind of not gone above to see how they've gone above and beyond just reporting 990. This includes, digital records of past 990 documents, audits that may have been performed. They've also included other publicly available sources, in addition to, looking at social sector data that goes beyond tax-exempt organizations, as well as visuals and other available downloads. And so these are some really, some of the key resources that nonprofit scholars have that really take, again, this foundational block of data and kind of move forward with asking some deep questions. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you learned a little bit about nonprofit data and where to get started to really research this interesting field.